Failure rarely announces itself. Most of the time, it blends in quietly. It looks like routine. It sounds like confidence. It is reinforced not by recklessness, but by experience, by systems that have worked before, by people who believe they are doing their jobs correctly. When disasters are examined later, they often look obvious in hindsight. Warnings appear clear, decisions appear careless, but that clarity does not exist in the moment. In the moment, nothing feels dramatic, nothing feels urgent, everything feels manageable. And that is where most failures begin. In large organizations, responsibility is rarely singular. Decisions are distributed across teams, departments, and processes. No one person sees the full picture at once. Each individual acts within their role, guided by procedures designed to reduce error. Ironically, this structure can make failure harder to recognize because when responsibility is shared, urgency often is not. What feels like a minor concern in one meeting becomes an assumption in the next. And by the time those assumptions align, the outcome is already in motion. Complex systems do not fail all at once. They adapt. Each successful outcome becomes proof that the system is sound. Each unexpected result becomes something to analyze later. Over time, experience stops being a source of caution and starts becoming a source of confidence. When a system performs well repeatedly, it creates a powerful assumption that tomorrow will look like yesterday. This assumption is rarely spoken out loud. It doesn't need to be. It exists in meeting rooms, in reports, and in language. It exists in phrases like, "we've seen this before," and "nothing bad happened last time." Gradually, the line between what is safe and what is merely acceptable begins to blur. Over time, this experience begins to replace caution. When nothing goes wrong, confidence grows quietly, not because the system has been proven flawless, but because its flaws have not yet caused harm. Each successful outcome becomes evidence that procedures are sufficient, that safeguards are working, that previous concerns no longer require immediate attention. Eventually, experience itself becomes the justification, and questioning the system begins to feel less like responsibility and more like unnecessary doubt. Risk does not usually disappear. It is reclassified. Warnings are rarely ignored outright. They are softened. Language changes first. Dangerous becomes unlikely. Concerning becomes minimal. Unknown becomes within expectations. These words do not remove risk. They make it easier to live with. When outcomes are measured statistically, individual warnings lose urgency, especially when previous missions ended successfully, especially when anomalies did not lead to immediate consequences. Over time, the absence of failure begins to feel like proof of safety, not because the risk is gone, but because it has become familiar, and familiar risks feel manageable. This shift does not happen all at once. It happens gradually across documents and discussions that appear routine. Concerns are logged, reviewed, and categorized. Each one becomes a data point, not a warning. When nothing fails immediately, those data points lose their sharpness. They become part of the background. Over time, teams stop asking whether a risk is acceptable and start asking whether it is normal. Once a risk is considered normal, it no longer demands action. It simply requires explanation. And explanations are easier to produce than interruptions, especially when schedules are tight, especially when expectations are high, especially when the system has already succeeded before. There is a common misconception about institutional failure. People imagine chaos, arguments, someone shouting to stop. In reality, it is much quieter than that. There was no panic, no raised voices, no dramatic refusal to listen. There were meetings, discussions shaped by precedent, decisions framed by past outcomes. Every concern was weighed against schedules, against expectations, against the assumption that the system, as designed, would continue to function. These discussions were not rushed. They followed established procedures. Roles were respected. Authority was clear. Each decision fit neatly within the structure that already existed. Nothing appeared out of place. Nothing appeared reckless. From the inside, the process felt controlled, organized, reasonable. Stopping would have required admitting uncertainty. It would have delayed timelines. It would have disrupted momentum. Continuing felt easier, more professional, more reasonable. The process moved forward, not because the danger was unseen, but because it no longer felt exceptional. It had been seen before, discussed before, and allowed to pass. Once a process reaches this point, reversing it becomes increasingly difficult, not because the risk has increased, but because the cost of stopping has. By the time momentum is questioned, the decision is no longer whether to proceed, but whether it is even possible to stop. At this stage, stopping no longer feels preventative. It feels disruptive. The system has already adapted around the risk. Schedules have been set. Expectations have formed. What began as a technical concern becomes a question of coordination. And coordination, once in motion, resists interruption. On February 1st, 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia broke apart during re-entry. The failure did not begin that morning. It began earlier, quietly. During launch, a piece of insulating foam struck the wing. Engineers noticed. They asked for clear imaging to assess the damage. The request was denied. 7 people were lost. The warning was not ignored. It simply no longer felt urgent. Afterward, reports would be written, procedures revised, lessons named. But the most important failure was not technical. It was a failure of recognition. And by the time recognition arrived, there was nothing left to stop.